two, one, two, three.
Hello and welcome to Ithaca DSA Presents. I'm Theresa Alt. I'm here today with Robert Cantelmo, Mayor of the City of Ithaca. We're going to be talking about a big city project, which is to do rezoning. And as I understand it, this is actually something that the state is pushing. Is that so?
That's correct. We had the opportunity to secure about $250,000 grant to aid with this rezoning process from Governor Hochul last year.
So that's always good when something can be done with that state money that is collected from income taxes rather than from property taxes. In a general way, what kind of zoning are we looking at?
As you and I'm sure many of your viewers recall, it hasn't really substantively and comprehensively updated its zoning since the 1970s. We, of course, have Euclidean zoning, which really designates what type of land use is allowed in certain parts of the city. And despite the fact that between 70 and 75% of Ithacans are renters, the vast majority of the land in the city of Ithaca is actually set aside for single family home zoning. Now, for those who may not be as big into zoning as I know you and I are, it's important to draw the distinction. You can build a single family home anywhere. The contention that I have is we shouldn't be setting aside enormous parcels of land that only permit single family homes. We need to ensure that there's housing types at all levels for all types of Ithacans. And right now, I think the biggest example of something that is in dire need of reform is the R1 zoning district, the single family home zoning, which is predominant in West Hill, Bell Sherman, and parts of South Hill, requires that each individual home sit on a 10,000 square foot plot, which is just wild to me. The number of homes and people that we could fit on that land is far greater than what the current land use laws permit. And this is the type of thing that we're looking to kind of cut through as we offer this new zoning code, something that is way more inclusive and that is going to promote greater housing supply for the people who currently and want to live in our community.
Yes. Well, you mentioned that we have Euclidean zoning, which sounds very scientific. Is that still what we do?
It is still what we do. We have experimented with hybrid code zoning and form-based zoning. Attentive local politics watchers would be familiar with the conversation that we had last year along the South Side rezoning district, which blended Euclidean, which really focuses on the use type, residential, commercial, industrial, as well as the form, which is what it sounds like, what the built environment reflects.
What it
And I
looks
think
like?
exactly right. And I think Euclidean zoning became really popular along the same time as redlining and other segregationist strategies around the US. But form-based, I think, is really the direction we need to start moving in because who cares if a building has four different units with four different families in it if it looks like it is enmeshed in the existing built environment, right? And I really want to
Yeah.
emphasize built environment against neighborhood character because I think you and I know that that tends to be a dog whistle for keep renters out, right?
I have heard when something like that was proposed, people from, I think mostly Bell Sherman, came out and just stormed about how awful the renters are and how they are not involved in the city until one of the then council members, Stephen Smith, pointed out that he was a renter and was very involved in city affairs to the point of getting himself elected from the fourth ward.
Hmm. It's an excellent point, right? I mean, I think when you have, three out of every four people coming from a renting background, you want to ensure that your policies and your government reflects that relative balance. I think certainly we would love to see people, achieve the American dream of homeownership, but to legislate that be a requirement, I think becomes you kind of get the causal arrows backwards. And I think this conversation came up a little bit last year when we worked to legalize accessory dwelling units around the city. There was resistance in certain communities from folks who were very fearful about what it was going to do to their neighborhoods. A year later, nothing bad has happened. We have several accessory units underway. And I think more importantly, I had sat down with some folks who were concerned. And I understand change is sometimes scary, right? But I talked to folks and I said, listen, how many of you have children or grandchildren in the community? And I got a lot of hands raised, and I said, how many of you want your children or grandchildren to stay in Ithaca, right? And pretty much the same number of hands were up. But then my third question was, how many of you know a 25 or a 35-year-old who can afford a $350,000 home? And then, of course, a ton of hands go down, right? And we Ithacans can have very strong feelings about market dynamics. I certainly have my fair share of critiques. But at the end of the day, if we're not building more housing, there are going to be people moving into this community who push those price points up. And we need to ensure that we're tackling the affordability problem from a regulatory perspective as well as a supply perspective to ensure that we keep this community as affordable as possible for as many people as possible.
Right. So affordability is a big goal of zoning reform.
That is right.
Are there any other goals?
One piece of that is, you made a very funny but true observation about tax revenue. Municipalities in New York State are really hamstrung in how we provide for services. And in the same way that I can't find very many younger folks who can afford an Ithaca home, I also don't know many Ithacans who are clamoring for fewer city services. And one of the ways we address that, address the property tax burden that I really understand people are feeling, is we have to smooth that tax curve out by adding people to the tax base, right? That's through multifamily development. That's by just adding more folks. That has carry-on effects for our sales tax revenue. And it also has effects for quality of life. I mean, I've heard a lot of folks post-COVID sort of bemoan how some of their favorite restaurants downtown are no longer open for lunch. Well, I'll tell you, if we had more folks who in this community that could afford to live here, those labor issues would I think become a little bit more fluid, and we would see a return to what people had expected previously. And so, yes, it's about what could be built in terms of housing, but I think it's really important for people to understand that it has carry-on effects for the quality of life in our community, our ability to maintain parks and roads, and right, our ability to provide opportunity and stimulate the local economy.
But I had another thought, the old Euclidean concept, which said that you live in one place, you shop in a completely different place, you work in a completely different place. How do you do that? Well, of course, it means you have a car.
Hmm.
And and chances are you have two cars in a family.
Yep.
And I think, well, I'll just put out one of my goals
Yeah.
personally,
Yeah.
which is zoning for people, not for cars.
As you intimated, I completely endorse that view. I think about, for example, right, my parents who lived in New York until they retired, and now they're down in Charlotte, North Carolina, which is a beautiful city. It is also one of the least dense cities, while also being one of the highest population cities in the country. You can really see that in the built environment, right? People have to have a car to get from A to B. Well, to your point, the more that we embrace smart growth and density principles, not only is it easier because you know what, you can just walk out of your house and go to the Green Star or go to the Aldi or go to the Wegmans. But guess what? You also have carry-on benefits for some of the city's sustainability goals, right? You're reducing emissions in that way. Denser multifamily housing, it's less energy inefficient, right? It loses heat for cool air through the front of the back of the building as opposed to all of the walls. And then also, right, the more density we have in the downtown, the greater benefit we get in transportation economics with organizations like TCAT, where people again are really upset that some of those routes have been scaled back post-COVID or expansions haven't happened. Or like me, somebody who would love to see us get to the point where we have free TCAT one day. All of those things require us to hit a critical mass of ridership. And to do that, you need more people choosing to say, yeah, I'm gonna hop on the bus and get to where I need to go instead of hopping in the car and driving a mile. But again, we need to be able to provide the conditions that allow for that, right? One of those things, as you and I have talked about before, and an element of this rezoning proposal is going to be looking at repealing the minimum parking requirements in our zoning code. And just for a quick digression, right? Because again, in the same way that I'm not out here against single family homes. I'm against single family zoning. I'm not against parking where it's necessary and there's market demand for it and it makes sense. What I am against is the city telling people you can't build more housing units because you don't have enough parking set aside for what our arbitrary selected threshold is. And, I look at places, I live close to where sort of North Side Liquors and the barber shop is down there off of 13. And that parking lot is massive and it is never full, right? We don't need more empty parking lots, not providing productivity, not being utilized, being car storage. We need more places for people to live.
Yeah, and parking lots are also impermeable, which means that there's runoff.
Mm-hmm. Exactly right.
Now, rules that are closely related to lot size rules that you mentioned, lot coverage rules.
hmm So those rules exist again to preserve a specific aesthetic. I often am heard criticizing what I kind of refer to as an outdated, like 1970s style environmentalism, where you have a lot of people who will look at a front lawn or a back lawn and they'll see that there's green grass. And in their mind, green grass, that's equating to, well, this is green. It's good for the environment. Absolutely not, right? We of course don't want to oversaturate our city with impermeable surfaces, as you note, but there are a lot of efficient ways to capture runoff or flood risk. And we know with decades and decades of evidence that lawns are a really inefficient use of water and of land. And again, having these requirements that say, all right, you can have a parcel of land, but you can only put a house on 20% of that land, it's far, far too restrictive, right? We are working really closely with the community. I appointed an advisory group to help us design the changes. We are working with a consulting group and we're working with the city's professional planning staff to figure out what that sweet spot is. Because I also recognize there are some challenges when you have 100% lot coverage with accessibility and with, egress along the sidewalks and things like that. But we've got to find a way to improve what we have now and make it, again, easier to get more units of housing in there and make our community feel a little bit more lived in.
Yeah, and rules again about how close to the lot line a house may be. Something I know about because our house is non-compliant.
Mm.
It's built right on the lot line.
And personally, my feeling on this is, listen, we have state building code, we have state fire code. Those are very deliberately crafted statewide regulations for keeping people safe in their home and mitigating them from risk. We don't need to layer additional restrictive criteria on top of those. If we can have construction that meets those safety needs, we should be able to do so without kind of hamstringing ourselves further.
I've sometimes puzzled over if I advocate against a restriction like that, or for that matter, the off-street parking
Mhm.
rules that exist, I think, also in the R3 where I live. Is this conflict of interest? And I decided that my financial interest is completely unknowable. if we very soon have to sell our house, let's say because we can just no longer live independently,
Hmm.
then a more expensive house is beneficial to us because we
Sure.
get more money and, can maybe afford to move into Kendall or something like that.
Sure.
On
Sure.
the other hand, if we have quite a few years left in this house, a more expensive house means higher taxes every year. So it's really unknowable.
It really is, but I think key to that is ensuring that we do everything we can to provide as many options as possible for folks, right? To bring it back to the accessory dwelling units for a moment, one of the leading groups that helped champion that across the state was the AARP. And it was because they looked at communities where you had really stagnant housing markets and recognized that there were very few options for folks to be able to age in place, right? You name Kendall as an option that exists. That would, of course, even take you out of the city that you've lived in, right? It would change
Yeah.
your day of life. But for some folks, even that might be financially out of reach, right? And so being able to provide more infill housing, more multifamily housing gives people the options to say, I don't want to uproot my life after I've lived in a community for 30, 40, 50 years. But I also can't, sometimes it's folks have too much house for one or two people. Sometimes it's the property taxes. Sometimes, again, like you said, it's really great when our homes appreciate. We also have to pay the tax bill when it comes, right? So these changes really provide, it doesn't try to force like a one size fits all solution on everybody. It provides a lot more options for folks at various stages of life and at various income levels in our community.
Yeah, and you suggested allowing more multifamily homes, and I think that also goes to questions of height of
Hmm.
houses.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, I think again, people have a very specific type of building boogeyman in mind when they think about apartments relative to single family homes. But a lot of the work that the folks in the Yes in My Backyard, the YIMBY movement, right, what they talk about is there's an enormous spectrum in that middle area between your largest apartments and your single family home. If you walk through Fall Creek today and you really open your eyes, you will see a number of apartment buildings that are three, four, five stories that seamlessly blend into the neighborhood that they are already a part of, right? And just like your home on the lot line, right? They were built prior to some of these laws being put in place. They have established rights. Some folks refer to that as grandfathered. I have an issue with that term, but ultimately, there are ways to do this that don't disrupt the fabric of our community. And frankly, my feeling is it shouldn't matter to you, me, or whomever if you look at a building on the street and there are three or four families living in there, as long as folks are, of course, living in building code compliant homes, right? We want to make sure that we have affordable options, and the way to do that is to be really pluralistic in what we let get built.
Yes, and another advantage to having more affordable housing in the city is that people who work here at the many low-paid service jobs and also the Cornell clerical jobs that
Hmm.
don't pay very well
Hmm.
can afford to live maybe within walking distance of their jobs or bicycling distance or a bus ride away, but don't have to drive for an hour from outside the county.
Right. Right. I mean, I think as again, many of your viewers and listeners may recall, I know you and I were both very supportive of the UAW labor negotiations up at Cornell a few years ago. One of the big contentions that union had was how are they going to deal with the enormous cost of parking to get to work every day on the Cornell campus? That problem is representative of what you just highlighted, where you have people who are driving in from Schuyler County, Cayuga County, Chemung County every day to work here, whether it's at Cornell, whether it's at CMC, or elsewhere. And being able to get folks who serve this community the opportunity to actually stay here when they go home at the end of the day, right? That is just, it's much better for quality of life, working conditions, labor retention, as well as community building. We have such an obsession with this car-centric culture, and I meant to mention this a few minutes ago when you said it, but you talked about this old way of doing things, and it's so funny because only 60, 70 years ago did this turn really start to happen in earnest, right? Prior to that, communities developed in a much more organic way. And with the rise of the automobile, really kind of taking off with urban renewal and the end of World War II, you started to see this segregation of use between residential, commercial, and industrial. And of course, nobody wants a chemical plant in the middle of downtown, but there are obviously ways to address the environmental impact of some of the outliers versus the number of people that I have heard who are crestfallen that Kinney Drugs was closing in Fall Creek, right? Or I used to live up in the Cornell Heights neighborhood. The folks up there that I speak to who are seniors who say that they've got to arrange for transportation to and from Wegmans once a week because there's no corner store that they could walk to get bread and milk and any of the staples that they might need as the week goes on, right? You need to be able to recognize that we are trying to fit into a model that was, in my view, more of a flash in the pan of excitement for automobile ubiquity when in reality people when they go on vacation, right, where do they go? They go to the downtown of cities, right, or they go to Europe. They go to walkable communities and then talk about how wonderful it was and how they wish we could have that here. We just have to change the rules.
Yeah. Now, one of the things that I know the planning, the consultants were talking about was how they are required to, I think, obey the city's comprehensive plan,
Hmm.
Plan Ithaca. It's somewhere in the law,
That's right. It's in New York state law.
New York State law.
That's right. Yes, land use
Ah,
has to flow through your comprehensive plans that have been adopted.
frankly, I'm concerned about that because I have some concerns about the comprehensive plan.
Well, I share some of those concerns, right? This plan was adopted in 2015, right? It's 11 years old now, and it really reflects a very different way of thinking, even in just that one decade than we have today. But to give some assurance, and I know we're broadcast, right? So I'll tell you, I have sat down with the planning staff and expressed this very concern, and I have been assured that the type of zoning reforms that we want to enact as a council are very much in line with the existing comprehensive plan. I do think in future years there will be opportunity to revise and refine that even further. If not, just do a wholesale new plan because they really should be done every couple decades. But ultimately, if you look at that plan as written now, it talks about even in the neighborhoods like West Hill in Bell Sherman, right? These low density neighborhoods, it talks about unit density of up to 10 units per acre. Our medium density districts look at 10 to 20. And then our higher density districts don't have an upper bound, right? So I think that the work we're trying to do is very much in compliance with that existing comprehensive plan. And we just really need to stretch our muscles and approach what the promise of that comprehensive plan was when adopted. Because frankly, the city has not made great progress on implementing that vision over the last decade. And we continue to see that in escalating costs of living.
Well, I was concerned because it seemed to me that the comprehensive plan was out of one side of its mouth saying that neighborhoods should be inclusive, and out of the other side saying we should stay with neighborhood character. And I think the character of some neighborhoods is to be exclusive.
Well, I would certainly join you in opposing any efforts to retain exclusionary zoning or building practices. And that is a great candidate for something that I think requires a more surgical intervention as we look at updating that comprehensive plan over the next few years. But overall, right, I think that the community is very clear that, the city needs to move in this direction to be sustainable. I often say to folks who are skeptical about zoning reform or density, I say, listen, the world is changing around us, whether we like it or not. There is no option where you can choose. I would like Ithaca, you pull the lever, right? I would like Ithaca to stay the way it was in 1976 with the same level of housing and affordability. Like, great. I'm glad that you want that. That's outside of our control, right? There will always be wealthy faculty who are moving up to Cornell or administrators who can buy those homes at a price point that the rest of Ithaca can't afford. Not to be very reductive, but if you look at the political economy of the situation, right, the demand for living in this community is very high. If the supply does not grow, you're ultimately raising the floor on what is affordable for Ithacans, and you're really, in my view, rewriting what it means to be an Ithacan. And so I get that this stuff is scary. I would really encourage folks who are skeptical to be engaged and follow the process because I think that there's a lot to be learned and there's a lot of important voices to incorporate. We have the choice of being intentional about how we grow or sticking our heads in the sand and letting unaffordability happen to us.
Yeah. Thank you, Mayor Cantelmo, for telling us a lot about zoning in the city of Ithaca. This has been Ithaca DSA Presents. I'm Theresa Alt. Thanks for watching.
1, 2, 1, 2, 3.